I know not why God's wondrous grace to me he hath made known, or why unworthy Christ in love redeemed me for his own. But I know whom I have believed, and am persuaded that he is able to keep that which I've committed unto him against that day. I know not how this saving faith to me he did impart, or how believing in his word wrought peace within my heart. But I know whom I have believed, and am persuaded that he is able to keep that which I've committed unto him against that day. I know not how the Spirit moves, convincing men of sin, revealing Jesus through his word, creating faith in him. But I know and am persuaded that he is able to keep that which I've committed unto him against that day. I know not when my Lord may come at night or noonday fair, or if I walk the vale with him or meet him in the air. But I know whom I have believed, and am persuaded that he is able to keep that which I've committed unto him against that day. We know who we believed in. Our faith has found a resting place. My faith, not in device nor creed. Here we go on that first verse. My faith has found a resting place, not in device nor creed. I trust the ever-living one, his wounds for me shall plead. I need no other argument, I need no other plea. It is enough that Jesus died, and that he died for me. Enough for me that Jesus saves, this ends my fear and doubt. A sinful soul, I come to him, he'll never cast me out. I need no other argument, I need no other plea. It is enough that Jesus died, and that he died for me. My great physician heals the sick, the lost he came to save. For me he shed, precious blood he shed, for me his life he gave. I need no other argument, I need no other plea. It is enough that Jesus died, and that he died for me. My heart is leaning on the word, the written word of God. Salvation by my Savior's name, salvation through his blood. I need no other argument, I need no other plea. It is enough that Jesus died, and that he died for me. Thank you for your good singing. You may be seated.
Well, good morning. So great to see everyone this morning. Really been just excited to get here today and looking forward to our time together in the Word. And thank you so much for coming out to an early service to study the Bible. And I'm really just so thankful that we can do that and meet freely to be able to go through word by word, line by line, verse by verse, chapter by chapter, book by book. And that's what we try to do here just every service. And really thankful. Right now we're going through the minor prophets, and we're going to continue on with the book of Micah today, and just encourage you to turn over there. And we're going to look at chapter number 2 in the book of Micah. A lot of these books, you know, as we go through them, a lot of times, I think I mentioned it last week, as we read through our Bibles, we don't really spend a lot of time, maybe even thinking about them, and maybe we read them once a year on an annual Bible reading plan, maybe, if we do that, and I hope you do. I encourage you to do that. But it's those books that a lot of times we just kind of read through it and maybe don't really spend enough time to know, okay, what's happening and what's going on with all of this. But as we do spend time, what you start to see is how the story of God is so interwoven and connected, and it really helps you understand a lot of what He was doing, not just in the Old Testament, but also there's a lot of prophetic writings in there as well that have us looking forward to see, okay, what's God going to be doing? And we're going to get just a taste of that at the end of chapter number 2 today. But if you remember Micah, and as with a lot of the prophets and minor prophets, there is a lot of heaviness in these books as well. One of the main things that they are dealing with is the sin of God's people. God's people have been rebelling against the Lord. They've been rebelling against His Word, and there's a consequence for that. And God had warned them, and He is sending them warning again through the prophets, and Micah is just one such prophet. Now, as we saw last week, if you were with us, there in verse number 1, I think it's 1 or 2 of chapter 1, verse 1 of chapter 1, we see that Micah's ministry, it actually spans a fairly lengthy period. It covers the reigns of 3 different kings in Judah. So he's ministering for decades in that area. God gave him a pretty long ministry. Now, one of the main themes that we could say that Micah is preaching about has to do with the justice of God. And we'll see that even today as we go through this. So there's the issue of justice and righteousness, and on the other side of that, there is the consolation and hope that God will give His people. Now, Micah's name, anybody remember what his name means? Who is like the Lord? Who is like Jehovah? That's right. And it's interesting because when you get over to chapter number 7, as we're marching our way through, Micah asks that question, where he says, who is like our God? And it's like he basically uses his name as the conclusion of the book to show that God indeed is great. But his name does mean who is like Jehovah, or who is like the Lord. Now, there are several Micahs in the Bible, and Micah is a shortened form of the name Micaiah. So you'll also see Micaiah used as well. But Micah, this Micah in particular, he has a descriptor that's put on his name, that we know how we can identify him, and that descriptor is his hometown. Micah was from an area called Moresheth Gath, and he was a Moreshethite. And so he is Micah the Moreshethite. In fact, you know, Micah, when you get over into Jeremiah lived about 100 years after Micah, 120 years, and was prophesying later on. Micah was around during that time of the Assyrian captivity, if you remember, in that 722, 721 BC time frame. Then fast forward about 120 years, and Jeremiah is then prophesying. Jeremiah went through some rough times, really rough times. They hated him. They hated his message, just like you're going to see that they did with Micah. They took Jeremiah, and remember, they put him in a pit. They wanted to execute him. They wanted to starve him to death, and they wanted to kill him. Well, as all of that was going on, in fact, I don't have this, but let's go ahead and look at it, because there was a verse from Micah that was used to save Jeremiah's life later on, even 120 years after his ministry. So go with me to Jeremiah 26. I wasn't planning on getting into this. And it's actually from Micah chapter number 3 that we'll look at in the next week or so. But in Jeremiah chapter number 26, and I think it's down around verse number 18. All right, so even if you jump up to verse number 16, then said the princes and all the people unto the priests and to the prophets, this man is not worthy to die. They're talking about Jeremiah, right? And they're saying, this guy, maybe we shouldn't be putting him to death. This man is not worthy to die, for he hath spoken to us in the name of the Lord our God. Then rose up certain of the elders of the land and spake to all the assembly of the people, saying, Micah the Moreshthite prophesied in the days of Hezekiah. And that's the dude we're looking at right now in the book of Micah. In the days of Hezekiah, king of Judah, and spake to all the people of Judah, saying, Thus saith the Lord of hosts, Zion shall be plowed like a field, and Jerusalem shall become heaps, and the mountains of the house of the high places of a forest. Did Hezekiah, king of Judah, and all Judah put him at all to death? Did he not fear the Lord, and besought the Lord, and the Lord repented him of the evil which he had pronounced against them? Thus might we procure great evil against our souls. So, even with Jeremiah, Micah, he was already with the Lord, we could say. He was gone off the scene, but his word was still carrying weight and was used to actually save the life of another prophet over 100 years later. Now, again, Micah, the Moreshthite, that's just a small town to the southwest of Jerusalem, about 25 miles outside of Jerusalem. He's a small town preacher that God gave a very big ministry to a nation. And in chapter 1, back in Micah, what we saw is Micah, he began dealing with the sins of Israel and the sins of Judah. The sin of the northern kingdom with that capital of Samaria was beginning to spread, and it was spreading southward like a cancer. And he described it as an incurable disease. It was an incurable sickness, and it is spreading downward. And it's coming down, and as a result of that, it made its way all the way down into Judah, even to Jerusalem, and was having an effect on them. Because of the sin, judgment also came, and the Assyrian Empire, they began attacking and coming into that northern kingdom, and they ended up taking them into captivity, taking that northern kingdom of Israel captive. Then they continued marching southward, and they began working their way through Judah, and they started taking over cities in Judah, and then they made their way down to Jerusalem and to the gate of Jerusalem. But they weren't able to get through the gate because God protected them. It wasn't quite yet time for their judgment to be full. And we looked at that last week, but that was that story, if you remember, in 1 Kings, where there was an angel of the Lord that came and defeated the army of the Assyrians in a single night, over 185,000 soldiers in a single night. And because of that, they retreated from Jerusalem. But here is Micah. Micah is preaching and prophesying during that time. He's seeing all of this happen to his people. This is happening in his country land. And it is the judgment of God against the people. They have been living in sin for so long, rejecting God, rejecting His word. And so Micah is imploring the people, mourn over this. This isn't okay. You should be weeping out. You should be lamenting. And so in chapter 1, he's dealing with religious sins that were going on. He talked about the sins of idolatry and immorality. They were had places up in the high places. And remember, when God is shown as coming down to the earth, he was melting all of those high places as he was treading down upon them and destroying them. And God was judging their false religion. He was judging their idolatry. Well, once we get into chapter number 2, he moves from those religious sins, and then he starts looking at the sins of the people, and in particular, the leadership. He starts looking at how the leaders were now starting to have the fruit of that sin borne out in their own lives. And with that, we're going to pick up reading here in verse number 1 of chapter 2. Micah writes, "Woe to them that devise iniquity and work evil upon their beds. When the morning is light, they practice it, because it is in the power of their hand." So, what an image. Here they are. It's nighttime. They're laying on their beds, and they're devising evil. They're just laying around, conjuring up ideas, plans that are evil. This is premeditated. They're sitting around thinking about ways to sin in the night. You know, it reminded me of what Jesus said to Nicodemus. There in John 3, he said that men love darkness rather than light because their deeds are evil. And here are people that are laying on their bed, thinking, meditating, and premeditating on the sin that they were going to commit in the daytime. That's quite an awful thing. But notice what it says and who these are. It says, it is in the power of their hands. It's in the power of their hands. Now, what that lets us know is the people he's talking about right here are the people in leadership. It's the people that are in places of authority that not only can think of evil, but they have the ability to accomplish the very evil that they are conjuring up in their minds. It's the leaders. They're plotting, how are we going to sin tomorrow? And Micah is calling it out. And who he's calling out here in particular, when you think about it's in the power of their hands, a lot of what we see right here is he's talking about the government. He's talking about the governmental leaders, that they are doing this because there's something specific that we're about to see that they're thinking about in their sinful thoughts. But the governmental leaders sitting around in the darkness or laying around in the darkness, devising evil. Now, here's a rhetorical question. Do you think that happens today? Do you think there are any dark rooms late at night, back rooms, whatever image you want to get in your mind, those smoky, dimly lit rooms of governmental leaders devising evil against the people that they are to be protecting? That's what's happening. In the middle of the night, coming up with all of these types of plans, shady unrighteousness. And God wasn't okay with it then, and you can rest assured in this as well. God's not okay with it now. He's not okay with it in Israel. He's not okay with it in China. He is not okay with it in Iran, and he is not okay with it in America. The authority that God has entrusted to government, they are to wield that authority in righteousness. But here we see what they're doing is in the dark of night, devising evil. Verse number 2. And they covet fields, and they take them by violence, and houses, and take them away. So they oppress a man and his house, even a man and his heritage. Now notice what they're doing. They're coveting what somebody else already possessed. They're not trying to find ways of ingenuity to generate wealth. What they want to do is steal what other people have so they can have it. They're coveting. They're coveting houses. They're coveting lands. Now, is coveting wrong? Yeah, it is. In fact, there's actually a commandment about it. The 10th commandment is very simply said, what? Thou shalt not covet. And here they are violating the law of God. Now, we're going to get to the Mosaic law and the implications of that here in just a moment, but I want us to take a little bit of a deeper look on this sin of covetousness here for just a moment. Because the Apostle Paul reveals that this isn't just an issue of you have and I want, so give me. But coveting is a deeply spiritual problem. He puts another name on it. Paul puts another name on it in the book of Colossians in chapter 3, in verse number 5. Look at what he says. Mortify, therefore, your members which are upon the earth, fornication, uncleanness, inordinate affection, evil concupiscence, and covetousness, which is what? Covetousness is idolatry. Now, we recognize idolatry as putting something before God and choosing to worship after that, but here, God is saying that's exactly what coveting is what you are doing is you are elevating your self-pleasure, your self-gratification over the desires of God for you. You think that you having something else to make you feel good about you at the expense of violating the law of God and the commands of God is of more importance than obeying what God has said. That's the problem with coveting. It's not just this surface level, again, give me what you have. It's an issue of the heart. It's a spiritual matter of idolatry. So, here, that idolatry is being revealed in these leaders here that Micah is talking to. They have this insatiable craving for more. They want more. And what is it that they were coveting? Verse number 2 tells us, what was it? It was lands and houses. It was lands, the fields, and the houses. And they were coveting it to the point that they were willfully putting other people in oppression just so their real estate portfolio could continue growing. They just wanted, it was a big land grab. And here they are pursuing real estate at the expense of other people. Now, there's something important as we think about this in this day and what was going on. These are the leaders of Israel. Now, here they're coveting, which again, they're violating the 10th commandment. But you know what else they're violating? They're violating the Abrahamic covenant. Who had given Abraham the land? God did. Now I want you to go with me, and we're going to run this little rabbit trail for just a moment in Genesis chapter number 17. In Genesis chapter number 17, notice what God had told Abraham. In verse number 7, he says, I will establish my covenant between me and thee and thy seed after thee and their generations for an everlasting covenant. Okay, so here's this perpetual, everlasting covenant to be a God unto thee and to thy seed after thee, and I will give unto thee and to thy seed after thee, right here, the land. So the promise of God to Abraham, and in this covenant that he ratified with Abraham, God promised Abraham and his seed a land. He says, the land wherein thou art a stranger, all the land of Canaan for an everlasting possession, and I will be their God. So God promised that land to Abraham and his descendants forever. Now, when Moses comes along, God has him add further clarification about what that begins to look like in the nation. And we see it in particular when you get into Joshua, and they were going into Canaan, and they were to possess their possession. They were to go in, and here's the inheritance of God to this tribe, and the inheritance of God to that tribe. God had promised them the land, and they were to go into that land and possess it. It was theirs. God had given it to them, and that land was to then remain with the tribe. It was to remain with the families within that tribe. Now, Leviticus 25 has quite a bit to say about this, and there's just a few verses we're going to look at today. The land shall not be sold forever, for the land is mine. For ye are strangers and sojourners with me, and in all the land of your possession ye shall grant a redemption for the land. So the land was to stay with whom it was given to, and it was to be a perpetual possession to those to whom it was given. Numbers 36 takes this a little bit farther as well and talks about it. Numbers 36 and verse 7 through 9. So shall not the inheritance of the children of Israel remove from tribe to tribe. It's not to be removed from tribe to tribe, but notice, for every one of the children of Israel shall keep himself to the inheritance of the tribe of his fathers, and every daughter that possesseth an inheritance in any tribe of the children of Israel shall be wife unto one of the family of the tribe of her father, that the children of Israel may enjoy every man the inheritance of his fathers. Now, notice right here, there is no indication in this about economic status, right? No mortgage, nothing like that indicated in this, right? It is the inheritance of the tribe. It is given to them. It is to stay with them. Notice he continues on, neither shall the inheritance remove from one tribe to another tribe, but every one of the tribes of the children of Israel shall keep himself to his own inheritance. And what we just saw in Micah 2, verse number 2, is they are coveting lands that are not theirs. They're kicking people off of their inheritance. They're removing them from the land. Now, there's a lot that we could look at with all of this, but even understanding why God did this, and even, land could be used again as your property for exchange and using it for a temporary purpose. But what God did to make sure that that land stayed with the tribe to whom it was their possession is he gave them a special year. And it was called in Leviticus 25 the year of Jubilee. And in that year of Jubilee, if, say, maybe there was a lien or something against that land, all of that wiped clean and everything returned back to the original owner. They were to never lose their possession. And God structured his law to make sure of that. Well, here in Micah, they're just disregarding that. They're disregarding their own laws that God has given to them about the inheritance of their people. Now, God gave that, again, as I said, economic status. You're not reading that into that at all. It's, are you in that family or not? Right? Doesn't matter if you're rich or poor. And God is doing that to make sure that the poor aren't taken advantage of because they yet have an inheritance. But what they're doing right here in going against the law of God is they are seeking to monopolize. They're seeking to have the rich in absolute control of the poor, when God himself made a way for them to have a perpetual land, a perpetual property. and property rights that went along with it. And here these people are on their bed at night, laying there, scheming, devising a plan to take away land, to take away houses from the needy, to oppress the people. As one writer said it, what they were doing is they were practicing the world's golden rule. Anybody know the world's golden rule? Whoever has the gold makes the rules. And that's what they're doing. They didn't care about what God had said. What God had said directly to them, they simply didn't care. But here's what we find. They didn't care, but you know who did? God did. You see, God cares about how people get treated. He cares about injustice. He's not okay with it in any form. He is a righteous and a holy God, and no matter what level of economy or what level of governmental system injustice happens, know this, God's not all right with it. He's not. Here they're using real estate to get gain, to get ahead. But God is going to defend the poor and powerless, the orphan and the widow that he talks about so much. That's really the type of people that are being oppressed with this. The powerless. And God is going to judge those that are seeking to take advantage of others. Now, this scene right here in chapter number 2 of Micah, it reminds me of a story in 1 Kings. I think it's 1 Kings 21. It's a story about a king of Israel by the name of Ahab. Now, Ahab was not a good guy. He did a lot of sinful things. And he wasn't alone. His wife, Jezebel. You know, there's a reason why we don't name our daughters Jezebel, right? And so, she was a pretty bad lady. Not pretty bad. She was a bad lady. Sinful. Ahab, sinful. Ahab saw this vineyard across the way. And it was a guy by the name of Naboth. And Ahab looked out on that vineyard and, man, he coveted for that vineyard. He wanted that vineyard. And so he goes out to Naboth and he's like, hey, buddy, how about you give me that vineyard? And Naboth, if you go back there and read it, Naboth chose to align himself with the Abrahamic covenant and the law of God given through Moses and say, that's my father's inheritance. I'm not going to give that up. That's our inheritance. Ahab didn't care. Ahab, man, he got mad. He went home and he pouted and he was laying where? On his bed, crying. And in walks Jezebel. And they devise a plan. They have Naboth. Somebody brings false accusation against Naboth, and then they take Naboth and they take him out and they execute him. Now Ahab has his vineyard. That's what's going on. Right here in Micah chapter number 2, the governmental leaders oppressing the people. Just like Ahab and Jezebel faced the judgment of God, these leaders of Judah are going to face the judgment of God as well. Now let's go back to Micah 2 and look in verse number 3. And God warns them. He lets them know, therefore, thus saith the Lord, behold, against this family do I devise an evil. Now that evil there is not talking about sin, but God's going to bring trouble. He's going to bring destruction to them. From which ye shall not remove your necks, neither shall you go haughtily, for this time is evil. So here's what God lets them know. All right, you want to lay on your bed and devise a plan? Well, let me tell you, I got a plan too, against you. You're sitting there devising evil against other people, and you've got this great scheme going. Well, let me tell you, I got a plan too, and it involves the judgment that's going to come upon you What God's letting them know is here, you've been sowing this sinfulness. You know what you're going to reap? Judgment. You're going to reap judgment. He tells them, you're not going to be haughty anymore. You walking around in your self-pride. Man, I took that lady's house. I took their land. Again, look at this portfolio that I got. I'm wealthy. And God said all that haughtiness is gone. It's going to be done away with. And instead, what is going to be coming upon them is going to be a time of evil, a time of destruction, a time of great trouble. Verse number 4, in that day of judgment that's going to be coming upon them, in that day shall one take up a parable against you and lament with a doleful lamentation and say, we be utterly spoiled. He hath changed the portion of my people. How hath he removed it from me? Turning away, he hath divided our fields. So here, God is describing this Gentile adversary that's going to be brought in judgment. And what's going to happen is they are going to come in and they are going to destroy the land. They are going to be scattering the people. They're going to be taking the land, and then they're going to be dividing it up. And these people who have been in authority, that authority is going to be stripped from them. They're not going to have any control, any say over any of this. The judgment is coming. But not just that. You know what the enemy is going to be doing? Verse 4 says they're going to take up a parable against them. They're going to be making fun of them. They're going to be poking at them. You thought you were something when you're nothing. And all that pride is going to be destroyed. Then notice verse number 5. Therefore, thou shalt have none that shall cast a cord by lot in the congregation of the Lord. That casting a cord has to do with measuring out and setting boundaries on a property, on a land. And what he is saying right here to these leaders, to these people who've been trying to increase and expand their territory and their own land, he is saying, you're not going to be doing that anymore, and you're not going to be setting the boundaries. Somebody else is going to be doing that. Somebody you don't even know. He's basically letting them know this register of deeds that's going to come out, it's not going to come from within of all of you. It's going to come from somebody outside that's going to come in, and they are going to be setting the metes and bounds of this property, and you're not going to have any. They're going to be casting the cord, he says there in verse number 5. It'll be the enemy that's casting it. Now, as we look at this judgment against sin, here in just these first 5 verses, God's very clear about this. Because of what they've been sowing, they're going to reap judgment, and it's a reminder and an opportunity for us to look at our own lives. You see, because what they had failed to do, again, in not rejecting the covetousness, but going headlong into that sin, is greed had consumed them. And you and I live in a time where we too can be very susceptible to the exact same sin. Maybe it's not property, maybe it's not real estate or houses of any kind. Maybe it's just stuff. Materialism. It says, I need gain, I got to have more and more and more, and we seek to just continue to get gain, but we get gain at the expense of obedience. We get gain at the expense of faithfulness to God. To us today, I say, be not deceived. God is not mocked. whatsoever a man soweth, that shall he also reap. And it's a warning for all of us as we look at what these men were sowing. They're reaping it. And you and I need to be warned as well. Verse number 6. Let's continue on. Prophesy ye not, say they to them that prophesy. They shall not prophesy to them, that they shall not take shame. Prophesy not. That's what they're saying. Here, the false prophets of the day, here in the first few verses, the first 5 verses, we're dealing with the leaders, but now the attention gets turned to those that are speaking falsehood and falsely prophesying. And the false prophets of the day, the false preachers of the day are saying, don't say that, Micah. Don't be preaching that. You need to be preaching a happier message. You're talking about all this judgment and everything. You need to just be quiet. Speak not that prophecy. Don't be saying those words. You see, they didn't like the message. Just like they didn't like the message of Jeremiah. You remember Amos? Amos had a guy named Amaziah that was a false prophet against him. When we went through the book of Amos, we saw that. So here you have these people that are rising up because they simply don't like the message that is being preached, and they get antagonistic against it. And all that Mike is doing is just preaching what God has told him to do, to say what God has told him to say. But what kind of message do they want? They wanted a message like Jeremiah talked about, peace, peace, when there is no peace. That's what they wanted. Man, just go talk about health, wealth, and prosperity. Just make us happy, man. You're bringing us down. You're talking about all this sin, and you're talking about all this judgment. You're making me feel bad. Stop that. And nobody likes to hear that, right? But listen, when it's from God, when it is from God about our sin, instead of saying, stop, I don't want to hear you preaching that message. I don't want to hear what God has to say. We need to make sure that even for us today that our heart is staying tender, even when God points out those things in our own lives that we don't like to hear. Now, here's the reality with this. When we talk about the message of God, that yes, we live in a specific time and a specific culture, and we have to make sure that as we're preaching and ministering to people, that we are doing it in such a way that they know that right where they're at in their life at this very moment, in this moment of time, that God is speaking to them through His Word. And we have to make sure that we are communicating it that way. But here, listen, it is never, ever, ever to be at the expense of the message. You never compromise the message just to make it maybe feel a little bit better to the hearer. Preach what God says, not what people want to hear. In Micah's day, again, look at it in verse number 6. Prophesy ye not. They're telling him, shut up. I just don't want to hear your preaching. I don't want to hear you talking about this. Prophesy ye not, say them that prophesy. They shall not prophesy to them, that they shall not take shame. Verse 7. O thou that art named the house of Jacob, is the Spirit of the Lord straitened? Are these his doings? Do not my words do good to him that walketh uprightly? Now here's something important to notice about the message. I love that ending right there. God's just giving this message so straight to them, and then telling them at the end, listen, if you just do right, won't this message do good to them that are following after it? Even then. And it's a reminder. Here you have these false prophets rejecting Micah's message, but here, you know what that didn't mean? It did not mean that Micah's message was not right. Just because it was rejected didn't mean the message was wrong. And that's an important thing. The response of men to the message of God is not the standard by which the rightness of the message is evaluated. If God has said it, it is true, and we just simply need to preach what God has said. Micah here again, he's just being faithful. With a tough message, God has him preaching about judgment that's coming on sin. Now, you need to hang with us, because on the back end of this, we are going to go vertical with some hope, and Micah's going to take us there. But on the front end, sin needs to be dealt with before you get to the hope that can come at the end. And he's letting them know, listen, if you just listen and respond to this message, the result would be good. And so when the message of God comes, the question for us is, how are we going to respond? Are we going to obey it? Are we going to hear it? That's the people that God blesses. Our response to the message is a great revealer of the heart, just like it is right here with these false prophets. Verse number 8. Even of late my people is risen up as an enemy. Ye pull off the robe with the garment from them that pass by securely, as men averse from war. Now, here notice what they're doing and how they're behaving. Micah describes their behavior like the enemy. You're treating your own people just like the enemy treats us. And how are they treating them? Here is the downtrodden. Here is somebody that's walking like they're just coming back from war, and they're war-torn. They're just battle-fatigued, and you can kind of picture the shuffle that's of the march as they're moving forward, just wanting to try to make it back home, and just in tatters from the battle that they've been in. And here, they're seeing that guy walk by, and you know what they say? I could use that robe. I think I'll take that guy's robe. And what they're doing is they're committing highway robbery. This guy who's down in life and what he's been going through, and let's just take that from you, buddy. Everything else is going bad. You don't need this. And just taking even the covering of a man. But that's not all. It wasn't just the down and out. You know who else it was? It was women and children. Look in verse number 9 of chapter number 2. The women of my people have you cast out from their pleasant houses. From their children have you taken away my glory. From their children have you taken away my glory forever. They're evicting the women. They're kicking them out of their houses. The greed of these people is affecting the whole nation, the men, the women, the children. It's affecting the households. It's affecting the heritage of the nation. They're destroying their own nation because of their love for money. Their love for money. And what they're doing is even keeping people from dwelling in the very land that God had given them. Look, verse number 10. Arise ye, and depart, for this is not your rest, because it is polluted. It shall destroy you, even with sore destruction. Because of their sinfulness, how did God now view the land? He viewed it as polluted. They had defiled the land by their sin. This wasn't any longer a place of rest as it was intended to be, but now it's going to be a place of destruction, and destruction is going to come upon them. And even these very people that are mistreating others are going to be forced out of the land. They're going to be forced to leave. And he says it's going to be a sore destruction. Verse number 11. Let's keep moving along. If a man walking in the Spirit and falsehood do lie. Now, that's not talking about the Holy Spirit right there, right? We are to walk in the Spirit and not fulfill the lust of the flesh. But the spirit that he's talking about right here is a spirit of falsehood. This is the evil spirit of man. It is even a spirit that lies. He says falsehood. And what does it come in and say? Let's keep going. Saying, I will prophesy unto thee. So here's a man walking in the spirit and falsehood, lying. And here's what he's saying. I will prophesy unto thee of wine and strong drink. He shall even be the prophet of this people. So here's a guy. He's lying. And what is his message that he's preaching? Hey, listen, I'll tell you whatever you want to hear. And have a drink. Here's a drink. Doesn't that make you feel good? And so here, that lying prophet is coming, saying whatever they want to say, and letting them know basically, hey, buddy, just come here, drink your cares away, everything's going to be great. And what God is letting them know, this guy, that's the kind of prophet you're going to get. You've been rejecting my message. Well, here's the prophet now that you're going to get. Someone that's going to lead you into drunkenness, not holiness. Somebody that will cause you to continue rejecting the sobering message from God, to wake up and just lead you into a drunken stupor of sinfulness. That's the kind of prophet that you're going to get. Now, Micah has covered a lot of sin in just these 11 verses. He's looking here at the leaders. He's looking at the false prophets. There's a lot of sin. And again, as we look at Micah and other minor prophets, we get reminded a lot about the justice of God. And we see the contrast of the justice and righteousness of God with the sinfulness of man and with the sinfulness of God's own people. And the question as we look at this, of course, is how do we apply it? And we've seen some of that, but let me give you just a few ways here as we kind of wrap up and just kind of summarize even some of the things that we've already looked at. Again, when you read through this and you see the consequence of sin and the judgment that's coming upon them, they've been mistreating people, and it's a reminder of this. God cares about how we treat each other. He cares about that. Whether it is in deceiving people, lying to them, trying to steal what they have, getting angry, blowing up on them, hurting, manipulating, whatever it may be. You need to know that God cares about how we treat other people. He also wants us to respect each other's property. Did you see that as we're going through this and God is talking about the sinfulness of those leaders in stealing other property? You know, property rights is God's idea. And He is the one that gives the land. And God cares about how we treat one another's property. He wants us to respect that. He also wants us to guard ourselves against coveting and greed. He wants us to, as leaders, use influence. He wants all leaders to use their influence to compel people to righteousness, for them to live out the righteousness of God themselves instead of causing people to sin. He wants us, when correction does come, to be quick to obey and respond to Him. We see that God cares about our heart attitude toward the vulnerable and the hurting among us. He cares how we treat people. He wants us to help people in need. And so we need to make sure that we don't harden our heart to that when you see somebody in need. There's a lot of lessons. A lot of application, just here, even in chapter 2, that we can see. But Micah's not done. Because in verses 12 and 13, after going through all of that sin and really showing us the righteous character of God and how the people of God need to be holy as well, Micah spends a lot of time talking about sin, but then he ends with hope, a hope-filled promise for the nation, and in particular for the people of Israel here. God lets them know that they still have a future. Verse number 12, I will surely assemble, O Jacob, all of thee. Now that reference right there, when he says, O Jacob, that's not talking about just the divided kingdom and talking and looking at Judah. When he says, O Jacob, Jacob had his name changed, right, to what? Israel. And so now we're looking at the entirety of Jacob and his descendants, which would be the 12 tribes. So God is speaking to all of Israel. And he says, all of thee, I will surely gather the remnant of Israel. I will put them together as the sheep of Bozrah, as the flock in the midst of their fold. They shall make great noise by reason of the multitude of men. Verse 13, the breaker is come up before them. They have broken up and have passed through the gate and are gone out by it. And their king shall pass before them, and the Lord on the head of them. So right here, Micah lets them know that God is going to be regathering. He's going to be gathering his people, but not just that. It's God himself that's going to be leading his people. He's going to regather, and he's going to be leading. And even though most of the people had rejected God and his message, and as a result would face the judgment of God, God still has a remnant of people. God has a remnant here that he is promising that one day they are going to be gathered. And when they are, he describes it as a great noise. And I love that imagery of sheep, and you can imagine all the joy of the sheep and the bleating and all of that noise as they're just kind of jumping around when the shepherd comes. And all of that wonderful noise at the multitude as they're gathered together. And you can just imagine all the thanksgiving and all the praise. You know, the book of Revelation talks about that a noise, and it's like a roaring thunder of praise. Can you imagine being in multitudes one day of millions and billions of people as we are praising God, and how noisy that's going to be in a good way? As the praise of God ring out. And God lets them know at the head, look to the head, and there he is. There's the Lord. The great shepherd has come to lead his flock. He has regathered his flock. They're joyous at his appearance. He has now arrived. And at his second coming, that's exactly what's going to happen. He's going to restore and regather his people into his land. And you know, even with all the heaviness of the sin that we looked at here in Micah chapter number 2, you know, and we can look at it even in our own lives, folks, the heaviness of sin in our own lives, and we should look at that and just hate it within ourselves, at the consequence of it in our own lives. Thankful for the grace of God that was extended to us through Calvary, through Jesus Christ and his death and his resurrection. But even as we contrast the sin and the heaviness and weight of all of that, I'm thankful that God still gives us hope. He gives us hope through the person of Jesus Christ. And I'm thankful. Thankful for the hope that he's coming again. Maybe morning, maybe noon, maybe evening, but surely soon. He's coming again. Father, we thank you for the hope that we have in Jesus Christ to know that one day The sky will unfold, and we shall see Jesus. And God, we long for that day. Lord, with the sinfulness of this life that we deal with and the sinfulness even in ourselves, God, we long for that. And we say, even so, come Lord Jesus, as we look up and we wait with anticipation for the hope that one day will be revealed when we see Christ. And we pray all this in His name. Amen. Amen. Thank you, church.